A prominent judge delivers a crushing 60-year sentence to a young man he deems guilty, but when overlooked evidence resurfaces, it exposes a corruption scandal so vast that it shakes the justice system to its core. The courtroom in Fresno, California, was packed that day, the tension as thick as the summer heat outside. Judge Malcolm Brewer, known for his no-nonsense demeanor and unflinching decisions, was the center of attention. A pillar of justice for 35 years, Brewer's face, as unyielding as his reputation, gave away no emotion. Compassion was rare in his courtroom, and second chances even rarer. On the other side of the room stood 24-year-old Ryan Hale, the defendant, his hands trembling ever so slightly. His expression, however, was steadfast, a mix of defiance and exhaustion. Arrested for an armed robbery at a local jewelry store that had left one man gravely injured, Ryan had consistently pleaded his innocence. But now, his fate rested solely in Judge Brewer's hands. "Mr. Hale," Brewer began, his commanding voice reverberating through the courtroom, "you've been convicted by a jury of your peers for acts that have irreparably harmed this community. Your behavior was calculated, reckless, and without remorse." Ryan's mother, seated in the back row, stifled a sob. She had written letters and made impassioned appeals, asking the court to see her son not as a criminal, but as the boy who had dreamed of becoming a firefighter. None of it mattered. The evidence had drowned out every plea: eyewitnesses, video surveillance, and an anonymous tip that pointed directly to Ryan. "I hereby sentence you to 60 years in state prison," Brewer declared, his gavel striking with the weight of finality. Gasps rippled through the room as reporters scrambled to jot down every detail. Ryan stood motionless, his lips pressed tight, as if suppressing words that would make no difference. As he was led away, he turned for one last glance at his tearful mother. Judge Brewer retreated to his chambers, shutting out the murmurs and chaos. Pouring himself a cup of coffee, he stared at the dark liquid as though it might provide clarity. He believed justice had been served. But justice, as it turned out, had other plans. Dubbed the Hale robbery case, the trial had been a local sensation. The crime itself was audacious. A masked gunman stormed Carter's Jewelers, making off with over $150,000 worth of goods on a bustling Thursday afternoon. The heist left one store clerk, Samuel Gaines, critically injured in the chaos. 2 weeks later, Ryan Hale was arrested. An anonymous tip had placed him near the scene, and investigators claimed he matched the description of the suspect. The prosecution presented a damning case: surveillance footage showing a man of similar height and build, eyewitnesses swearing they recognized Ryan's voice, and fingerprints on the weapon left behind. To make matters worse, stolen goods were found in a storage unit under Ryan's name. His court-appointed lawyer fought hard, but was up against what seemed like insurmountable evidence. Still, Ryan never wavered, maintaining his innocence even as the case appeared airtight. As Brewer sipped his coffee that evening, he had no idea that the truth was clawing its way to the surface. A forgotten piece of evidence, dismissed as irrelevant during the trial, would soon reemerge. This overlooked detail would unravel a web of deceit that implicated not just witnesses, but key figures in the investigation. What had seemed like an open-and-shut case would soon transform into a scandal of epic proportions. Brewer's confidence in the justice system, and in his own judgments, would be tested like never before. As Ryan Hale sat in his cell, processing the weight of his sentence, the wheels of a far-reaching conspiracy were set into motion, ensuring that the story was far from over. "I didn't do this," Ryan had told the jury during his testimony, his voice steady but strained. "I wasn't anywhere near that store. I've never even touched a gun." His alibi, that he was pulling a double shift at the auto shop that day, collapsed when his boss admitted under oath that he couldn't confirm Ryan's whereabouts for the entire day. The prosecution seized the opening like a predator going for the kill. "This is a man who thought he could outsmart the law," the district attorney declared, pacing before the jury. "But the evidence doesn't lie. The fingerprints don't lie. The witnesses don't lie." By contrast, Ryan's defense felt like a candle in a storm. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," his lawyer pleaded, "there are holes in this case, doubts. Isn't that enough to give this young man the benefit of the doubt? But the lawyer's tone lacked conviction, and the jury remained unmoved. Their deliberation was swift, less than 3 hours. When the foreperson read the verdict, guilty on all counts, Ryan didn't move, but the slight tightening of his jaw betrayed the turmoil beneath his calm exterior. Judge Brewer, as methodical as ever, steeled himself to deliver a sentence he believed fit the crime. He had seen his share of manipulators, of men who could lie convincingly under oath. To him, Ryan was no different. Brewer's gaze swept over the courtroom before landing on Ryan, searching for any trace of remorse. Finding none, he pronounced the sentence: 60 years in state prison. The courtroom exhaled collectively. For the victims, there was relief. For Ryan and his mother, devastation. As Brewer signed the sentencing papers later that evening, an unshakable unease crept into his thoughts. He dismissed it as fatigue. But the truth was already stirring, refusing to stay buried. It started on an otherwise unremarkable Wednesday evening. Judge Brewer sat in his study, a soft desk lamp casting a golden glow over the chaos of legal briefs and case files. Retirement had been on his mind, but tonight, work demanded his attention. A new case involving allegations of police misconduct had landed on his desk. As he sifted through the documents, a seemingly insignificant detail caught his eye, an evidence log from a prior investigation. He almost brushed it off, just another file in a sea of paperwork. But then, a name jumped out. Ryan Hale. Brewer froze, his eyes narrowing. It wasn't unusual for names to reappear in unrelated cases, but something about this felt different. He flipped the page, his pulse quickening. The log detailed items from a police evidence locker tied to another robbery investigation that occurred around the same time as Ryan's trial. One item in particular stopped Brewer cold: a gun. Its description matched the weapon from the Carter's Jewelers case. Brewer leaned forward, the pieces starting to come together in his mind. He compared the serial number on the log to the trial documents, still fresh in his memory. It was an exact match, same make, same barrel scratches. Yet the log indicated that the gun had been seized during an unrelated arrest 2 days after the jewelry store heist. How is that possible? He muttered to himself, the room seeming to tighten around him. If the gun had been in police custody before Ryan was arrested, it couldn't have been used in the robbery. And if it wasn't the weapon, whose fingerprints had been found on it? The implications rattled him. This wasn't a clerical oversight. It felt deliberate. Brewer, a veteran of the legal labyrinth, knew how easily evidence could be manipulated or buried. But this was different. Determined to uncover the truth, he requested the full case file for the unrelated robbery. It arrived the next morning, a thick folder stuffed with police reports, photographs, and witness statements. Brewer dove in, his practiced eye scanning for inconsistencies. The deeper he went, the clearer it became that something was terribly wrong. Details that should have aligned didn't. Witness accounts contradicted each other. Key evidence had inexplicably vanished. And then there was the arresting officer, an ambitious detective whose name had surfaced in previous complaints of misconduct. Brewer's unease deepened into something darker: suspicion. The more he uncovered, the more he realized that Ryan's conviction wasn't just a mistake. It was part of a much larger, far more sinister puzzle. The more Brewer and Hayes unraveled, the deeper the rot seemed to go. The arresting officer in the unrelated case wasn't just a key figure. He was the linchpin of a conspiracy. Detective Lewis had orchestrated the anonymous tip, weaponized a burner phone, and manipulated the trial from the shadows. Brewer's motion to reopen Ryan's case was a bombshell, but it was only the beginning. As the courthouse buzzed with rumors, Brewer worked tirelessly behind the scenes. He knew Lewis wouldn't go down without a fight. The detectives' allies in the department were already circling the wagons, dismissing Brewer's evidence as baseless accusations. But Brewer and Hayes weren't working alone anymore. Word of the reopening reached investigative journalist Sophia Delaney, a relentless reporter with a reputation for exposing corruption. She approached Brewer with a simple offer: "You get me the truth, and I'll make sure the world hears it." Together, the trio unearthed a damning timeline. Witness statements shifted when Lewis entered the picture. Key evidence, like the burner phone, had been conveniently overlooked. And the gun at the center of it all? Its journey from evidence locker to crime scene defied logic and protocol. As Sophia prepared her exposé, Brewer filed an emergency hearing to present the new evidence. The courtroom, once again packed, was electric with tension. Brewer took the stand as a witness, laying out every detail of the conspiracy. The atmosphere turned when Hayes introduced the recovered emails, each one a nail in the coffin of Lewis's credibility. Lewis, who had been sitting stoically, finally broke his composure, his face betraying the panic beneath. The district attorney's office launched an internal investigation within hours. The judge overseeing the hearing, visibly shaken, overturned Ryan's conviction on the spot, citing gross misconduct and systemic corruption. Ryan, freed after months of wrongful imprisonment, embraced his sobbing mother as the courtroom erupted. But for Brewer, the fight wasn't over. Lewis and his allies would face charges, but the system that had allowed them to thrive demanded broader reform. Standing on the courthouse steps, Brewer addressed a swarm of reporters. Justice isn't just about punishment, it's about accountability. Today, we took the first step. As Sophia's article went live, exposing the depth of the scandal, it sparked a nationwide reckoning. Departments across the country began re-examining cases, and Detective Lewis became a symbol of everything broken in the system. For Brewer, the road ahead was uncertain. He had sacrificed his career and faced threats to his safety, but the thought of Ryan's freedom made it all worth it. Justice, after all, wasn't about maintaining the status quo. It was about doing what was right, no matter the cost. And in a quiet moment that evening, as Brewer sat in his study with a cup of coffee, he realized something. For the first time in decades, he felt the weight of the gavel lift. Justice, he thought, might finally be served. In the days that followed, the repercussions of Judge Brewer's actions were both swift and far-reaching. The motion to reopen Ryan Hale's case sent shockwaves through the judicial system. News outlets across the nation picked up the story, highlighting the corruption within the Fresno Police Department and the bravery of a judge willing to stand against it. However, with the exposure came an avalanche of backlash. Anonymous threats became an almost daily occurrence. Late-night calls of silence and heavy breathing plagued Brewer's household. One morning, he discovered the tires of his car slashed, with a crude note scrawled across the windshield, "Drop it or else." His colleagues distanced themselves, murmuring in hushed tones as he passed. Public opinion was sharply divided. While some hailed Brewer as a hero fighting for justice, others painted him as a traitor, undermining the integrity of the very system he was sworn to protect. Detective Lewis, meanwhile, wasn't about to go down quietly. Through his attorney, he vehemently denied all allegations, claiming Brewer's motion was nothing more than a personal vendetta. "These are baseless accusations," Lewis declared in a televised interview. "This is an attack on my character and my decades of service to the community." His polished demeanor contrasted starkly with the mounting evidence against him, but for many, his words sowed doubt. Brewer watched the broadcast from his living room, his jaw tight with frustration. The lies were bold, calculated, and maddeningly effective in casting a shadow over the truth. Despite the threats and public scrutiny, Brewer pressed forward. Working alongside retired investigator Daniel Hayes, they uncovered an even darker narrative. Hayes had managed to recover deleted emails from Lewis's police account, one of which detailed a meticulously crafted plan to frame Ryan Hale. The email was addressed to the district attorney and included a list of fabricated evidence and manipulated witness statements, all designed to ensure a conviction in the Carter's Jewelers case. Attached to the email was a note from Lewis: "This has to stick. No room for errors." But the breakthrough came in the form of security camera footage from a parking lot near the jewelry store. Hayes had tracked down the original files, which had somehow never been submitted during the trial. The footage showed a man matching Lewis's physical description leaving the scene with a duffel bag. It was undeniable, irrefutable evidence of Lewis's direct involvement in the robbery. Brewer's heart pounded as he reviewed the tape. This wasn't just about Ryan Hale's innocence. It was about exposing a deeply corrupt system. Brewer called for an emergency hearing to present the new evidence. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Reporters' cameras flashed incessantly, capturing every moment. As the footage played on the screen, gasps rippled through the gallery. The image of Lewis, so closely tied to the case, leaving the scene of the crime, was a damning revelation. "This man," Brewer said, pointing to the screen, "is the same detective who led the investigation against Ryan Hale. He manipulated evidence, coerced witnesses, and framed an innocent man to cover his own tracks." The reaction was immediate. Reporters scrambled to update their stories, activists called for accountability, and the courtroom buzzed with the weight of the revelation. Lewis, sitting in the gallery beside his lawyer, looked pale but defiant. As he was escorted out in handcuffs, he leaned toward Brewer and hissed, "You don't know what you've started." The confrontation left Brewer shaken but resolute. The case was now in the hands of a higher court, and Ryan Hale's conviction was being re-examined. But Brewer knew this was far from over. He had uncovered a thread that unraveled a much larger web of corruption, and the fight for justice would be long and arduous. Weeks later, Brewer found himself back in the same courtroom where Ryan Hale had been sentenced. This time, the atmosphere was markedly different. The gallery was filled with reporters, activists, and Ryan's family, all awaiting the presiding judge's decision. Ryan, thinner and visibly aged from his years in prison, sat quietly at the defense table. Despite everything, his posture was steady, his gaze unwavering. As the judge announced the decision to overturn Ryan's conviction, the room erupted in applause and tears. Ryan stood, his hands trembling as his mother rushed to embrace him. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Brewer, seated quietly in the back of the courtroom, allowed himself a rare smile. Justice had been served, but the journey had come at a steep cost. In the days that followed, the fallout continued. Detective Lewis faced a slew of criminal charges, and an independent investigation into the Fresno Police Department revealed a culture of corruption that had persisted for years. Several high-ranking officials resigned, and sweeping reforms were implemented to address the systemic failures. The case sparked nationwide conversations about judicial accountability and the need for oversight in law enforcement. For Brewer, the victory was bittersweet. While he had helped right a grievous wrong, he had also exposed the fragility of the system he had devoted his life to. Colleagues continued to shun him, and threats against his safety persisted. Yet, he remained undeterred. Brewer began working with advocacy groups to push for legislative changes that would prevent wrongful convictions. His efforts inspired new policies aimed at ensuring transparency in evidence handling and greater protections for witnesses. Ryan Hale, now a free man, faced his own challenges. Rebuilding his life after years of wrongful imprisonment was no small task. Relationships had been strained, opportunities lost, and the shadow of his conviction lingered. Yet, Ryan was determined to move forward. Partnering with organizations dedicated to exonerating the wrongfully convicted, he used his story to shed light on the flaws of the justice system. Months later, Brewer stood alongside Ryan at a rally advocating for criminal justice reform. Addressing the crowd, Brewer's voice carried the weight of his experiences. "Justice is not a destination," he said. "It's a journey that requires vigilance, courage, and an unwavering commitment to the truth. What happened to Ryan should never have happened, and it's our responsibility to ensure it never happens again." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers a testament to the power of resilience and accountability. As the rally ended, Ryan approached Brewer, shaking his hand firmly. "Thank you," Ryan said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Not just for me, but for everyone who'll benefit from what you've done." Brewer nodded, the weight of the journey they had both endured evident in his expression. The fight for justice was far from over, but together, they had taken a crucial step toward a better system. Their story became a beacon of hope, a reminder that while justice is imperfect, it is worth fighting for.